Welcome to the Sleep Paralysis tapes. Settle into the dark, pull the covers close, and let the heavy silence fill your room. Tonight, we descend into chilling tales of the unexplained. Before the screen fades to pitch black, I invite you to become part of this archive. If you have your own terrifying encounters, please contact me and I will narrate your story in a future tape. If these shadows bring you comfort, please like, subscribe, and tap the bell. Now, close your eyes. Do not look at the foot of your bed. Just listen and let us begin. The fourth-floor east wing of St. Vincent's Hospital is a quiet place now. But it wasn't always. And that's what you need to understand first. In the fall of 2021, during the Delta wave, it was a converted COVID ICU, a general med-surg floor stripped and rebuilt for the drowning. By the time our story starts, the worst had passed. The beds were empty. All except one. This is where we meet Sarah Chen. 7:03 p.m. on a Tuesday. Sarah's shift is just beginning. She's in the staff locker room putting on her armor. The N95 mask, the face shield, the blue gown. You get used to the ritual. You never get used to the silence that waits for you on the other side of the unit doors. She badges in. The door clicks too loud in the hallway. And then, the hum. That's the sound of the fourth floor east. The low, constant hum of ventilators and IV pumps and heart monitors. Except tonight, it's just one hum. A single, solitary song from room 418. The hallway is a tunnel of dimmed lights and closed doors, each room dark, each bed stripped bare. The only light spills from the nurse's station, a lonely island in a sea of empty space. Sarah walks past. Room 410, 412, 414. You get the picture. It's just her, the hum, and the ghost of what this place used to be. She reaches the nurse's station. The chart for the last patient is open on the computer. Elias Henderson. 78 years old, intubated, sedated, stable. The last man standing in the pandemic ward. Sarah's routine is simple now. One patient means one set of vitals, one set of drips to check. It should feel easy. It doesn't. The isolation of it is heavier than the full ward ever was. When the ward was full, the horror was shared. Now, it's just you and the hum and him. She prepares his medications. Propofol, the milky white sedative, keeping him under. Fentanyl for the pain. The vials are cold in her hand. She walks to room 418. Standard hospital issue. Beige walls. A window looking out onto a dark parking garage. And in the center, the bed. And in the bed, Mr. Henderson. He's a large man, or he was. Now he seems shrunken, swallowed by the sheets and the tubes. The ventilator breathes for him with a steady, mechanical sigh. His eyes are closed. The sedation is supposed to keep him still, to keep him absent. Sarah checks the monitor. Heart rate steady. Oxygen saturation acceptable. She adjusts the IV drip. She notes his numbers on the chart. All routine. All normal. But then she looks at his hands. They're resting on top of the blanket, loosely restrained with soft cloth ties to prevent him from pulling at the breathing tube. His right hand is still, but his left hand is twitching. Not a seizure, nothing clinical. It's a gentle, repetitive motion. The fingers curl in slowly, then relax. And curl in again, like he's grasping for something, like he's holding a hand that isn't there. Sarah watches it for a full minute. The steady rhythm of the ventilator marks the time. She tells herself it's just a reflex, a random firing of neurons under sedation. She's seen it before. She's a professional. She reaches out and gently rests her own gloved hand on his wrist to still the movement. His skin is warm. The twitching stops under her touch. For a second, it's just a nurse comforting a patient. A normal moment in an abnormal place. Then she lets go. And as she pulls her hand away, his fingers twitch once more. That slow, deliberate curl, reaching into empty air. She finishes her tasks, leans up, leaves the room. The door whispers shut behind her. Back at the nurse's station, she documents the agitation. Patient exhibited periodic unilateral hand movement, resolve with tactile redirection. That's the language you use. It sounds controlled. It sounds understood. But sitting there in that pool of light, with the long, dark hallway stretching out on either side of her, Sarah Chen feels a very specific kind of cold. It's the cold of being the only waking soul in a place built for the sick and the sleeping. And somewhere behind her, in room 418, the machine goes on breathing. And the hand, in the quiet dark, keeps reaching. This is where it starts. With a twitch. A simple, almost nothing detail. The kind of thing you'd forget by morning. Sarah forgot it by morning. But it came back. It always comes back. The next night, Sarah saw the note. It was on the bedside table, scrawled on the back of a medication schedule in shaky, desperate capital letters. It wasn't there when she'd left at 7 that morning. Now, at 7 that night, it was. It read, "Amy stayed." She stared at it. The ventilator kept its rhythm. Mr. Henderson's left hand lay still on the blanket. Sarah picked up the note. She checked his chart. No new orders. No mention of an Amy. No float nurse assigned. She thought of the twitching hand. She told herself it was delirium. Sedation does strange things to the mind. It builds rooms out of nothing. She took the note to the charge nurse, a weary man named Mark. He glanced at it and sighed. He checked the staffing roster. "No, Amy," he said. "Not on days, not on nights. Not in this hospital as far as I know. Probably a dream." Propofol dreams are vivid. You know that. Sarah knew that. She'd heard patients talk about wild dreams under the sedative. But they were usually disjointed nonsense. This was a name, a simple declarative sentence. Amy stayed. She went back to her routine. But the silence of the floor felt different now. It felt occupied. 2 nights later, he was stronger. They were weaning him off the ventilator. They'd given him a small notepad and a marker so he could communicate. The first thing he wrote, his hand trembling with the effort, was, "Nurse Amy, thank you." Beneath it, another sentence, the letters pressed so hard they nearly tore the paper. She held my hand. This is where a reasonable person would double down on the medical explanation, a comforting hallucination. Sarah tried to believe it, but she remembered the feeling of his wrist under her glove, the twitching fingers reaching for a hand that wasn't there. The following Tuesday, they took him off the ventilator. He was weak, his voice a papery rustle, but his mind was clear, painfully clear. Sarah sat by his bed with her notepad. Mark, the charge nurse, stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Sarah said gently, "Mr. Henderson, can you tell us about Amy?" The old man's eyes, suddenly alert, fixed on hers. "She came at night," he whispered. "When the drowning was worst. When I thought the machine was all there was," he described her. Not in vague terms, but with the sharp detail of someone remembering a lifeline. She wore pale blue scrubs. Curly red hair, pulled back. Freckles across her nose. Around her neck, an old woven lanyard with beads on the ends. It had writing on it. St. Vincent's, 1982 to 1987. 5-year service anniversary. He paused, gathering breath. She had a tattoo on the inside of her left wrist. A little butterfly. Orange and black, Sarah asked before she could stop herself. "A monarch?" He nodded slowly. "A monarch." "Yes." He said the nurse would sit in the chair where Sarah was sitting now. She would take his restrained hand in both of hers. Her hands were cool. She would tell him, very softly, that he wasn't alone, that he was going to make it. She would stay for hours, he said, just holding on, until the panic passed. "She was real," he insisted, his voice cracking. Her hands were real. Mark shifted in the doorway. His professional skepticism had evaporated. He walked to the nurse's station. Sarah heard the clicks of the computer mouse. He searched the employee database. He checked the archived paper records from personnel. He came back, his face pale. He looked from Mr. Henderson to Sarah. He said the words that changed everything. There is no nurse Amy. There never has been. Not in our system. Not in any department, going back 30 years. The hum of the floor seemed to sharpen in Sarah's ears. Mr. Henderson just looked at them. A quiet, unshakable certainty was in his sunken eyes. He had the details of a ghost, and he was utterly, completely sane. The silence after Mr. Henderson's words was the loudest thing Sarah had ever heard. It wasn't just quiet, it was a held breath. Mark didn't argue, he just picked up the phone. His voice was low and flat. He said, "Security." "David, I need you to pull the hallway feed for 4th East. Room 418. Last 5 nights. From 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. Yes. Now, a reasonable person would have stopped here. A medical mystery is one thing. A ghost story is another. You can file one, you can't file the other." But Sarah wasn't feeling reasonable. She felt the cold from the empty hallway seep into her bones. She remembered the twitch of his fingers, the weight of a hand that wasn't there. Security guard David arrived 20 minutes later, rolling a laptop on a cart. He was a big man, former military. He set up at the nurse's station. The 3 of them huddled around the small, bright screen. David said, "All right." Low-light cameras, black and white, grainy as hell. "You won't get a clear face, I'm telling you now." He pulled up the feed from 5 nights ago. The timestamp glowed in the corner. It was 10:58 p.m. The view was from a camera looking down the long hallway toward room 418. The image was a study in grays, dark doorways, the faint glow of exit signs, an empty chair. They watched the static scene. 11 p.m. 11:01. At 11:02 exactly, a figure walked into the frame. Sarah's breath caught. The figure was female. She wore pale scrubs. They showed up as a lighter gray. Her hair was a darker, textured mass pulled back. Curly. She walked with purpose, but not hurry. A nurse on a round. She went straight to room 418. She didn't pause. She simply opened the door and went inside. The door closed softly behind her. David stopped the playback. He looked at a badge swipe log on a second screen. He said, "Unit door log shows no entry at 11:02. We're within 10 minutes of it. The last swipe was at 10:50 p.m. Mark's voice was tight. He said, "Run it forward." David let the footage play at high speed. The timestamp blurred. The hallway remained empty. Nothing moved until 4:14 a.m. Then, the door to 418 opened. The same figure stepped out. She turned and walked back the way she came, passing out of the frame. David checked the logs again. He said, "No door swipe on exit either." No one spoke. David's professional demeanor had cracked. A slight frown appeared between his eyebrows. He said, "One night. A glitch. A tailgater. It happens." He pulled up the feed from 4 nights ago. 11:02. The figure entered the frame. Same scrubs. Same walk. Into 4118. He fast-forwarded. 4:15. She left. 3 nights ago. 11:02. In. 4:16. Out. 2 nights ago. 11:02. In. 4:15. Out. Last night. 11:02. In. 4:15. Out. 5 nights. The same time. The same duration. A perfect, impossible schedule. David kept trying to get a clear shot of her face. He paused the footage on every frame. But it was useless. When she entered the hallway, her head was always tilted down. When she left, her face was turned toward the wall, or her hand was up, a blur of motion obscuring her features. It didn't feel clumsy. It felt deliberate, like someone who knew where the lenses were. Sarah whispered, "The lanyard." She pointed at the screen. David zoomed in on a paused frame. The figure was reaching for the door handle. Around her neck, a strap, and just visible, the faint suggestion of beads on the ends. David sat back. His chair creaked. He rubbed a hand over his mouth. He said, "I've got 2 CNAs on the overnight. Let me call them." He did. They were groggy, having just woken up. He put them on speaker. Yes, they remembered seeing a woman in blue scrubs a few times this past week, from behind, down the hall. They thought it was a float nurse from oncology or something. One said she'd seen her coming out of the supply room near 418. No, they didn't see her face. No, they didn't think it was strange. You see people, you don't question it. David thanked them and hung up. The 3 of them sat in the pool of light from the laptop, surrounded by the vast, humming dark of the empty ward. The mystery was no longer medical. It was digital. It was logged. It was witnessed. A figure, matching a sedated man's description exactly, was entering a locked ward without a badge. She was spending over 5 hours a night in the room of a dying man, and she was careful. So careful to never show her face to the camera. David finally broke the silence. His voice had lost all its official confidence. It was just the voice of a man who'd seen something that broke his rules. He stared at the frozen, grainy image on the screen. He said, "The logs are clean. The door didn't open. But she's right there." He looked at Sarah, then at Mark. His next question was the only one left. He asked, "So who the hell is she?" Gail Perkins had been a nurse at St. Vincent's for 45 years. She'd seen the hospital change from a brick-and-mortar community place to a sprawling medical city. She knew its bones, its hidden rooms, and its stories. When Sarah found her the next morning, in the quiet chaos of the day shift handoff, she didn't lead with the footage. She led with the description. She kept her voice low and clinical. Curly red hair, freckles, a monarch butterfly tattoo on the left wrist, an old lanyard with beads. St. Vincent's, 1982 to 1987. Gail had been typing at a computer. Her fingers stopped. Just stopped. The color drained from her face. It wasn't surprise or confusion. It was recognition, the kind that comes with a weight. She didn't ask why Sarah wanted to know. She didn't question it. She just stood up, her chair rolled back silently. She said, "Come with me." She led Sarah out of the unit, past the bustling main floors, to a service elevator. They went down, past the basement, to a sub-level marked archives and storage. The air changed. It smelled of dust and old paper, with a faint metallic tinge of disuse. Gail moved with a grim purpose. She knew exactly where she was going. They went through a maze of shelves stacked with old patient records in cardboard boxes. They passed a rack of obsolete monitoring equipment. They reached a corner where a few framed photos leaned against a wall, covered in a fine gray film. She picked one up. It was a group staff photo. The glass was dusty, but the image underneath was clear and bright. A dozen nurses and aides stood in crisp white uniforms and old pale blue scrubs. They stood in front of a nurse's station. A banner was strung up behind them. It read, 4 East, 1987. Gail didn't say a word. She just used her thumb to wipe the dust from the glass over one face near the end of the second row. And there she was, a young woman smiling. Her hair was a vibrant, curly red cloud around her face. Freckles dotted her nose. Her name tag was pinned to her scrubs. It read in clear block letters, Amy. Sarah's breath left her in a slow, cold stream. She leaned in. The photo was sharp, incredibly sharp. And there, On the inside of the woman's left wrist, as she rested her hand on the shoulder of the nurse in front of her, was a small, distinct tattoo. A butterfly, orange and black. A monarch.
Amy Callahan,
Gail said. Her voice was flat and hollow, like she was reading a eulogy she'd memorized long ago. She was a night nurse right here on 4th East. She started in '82. They gave out those woven lanyards for the 5-year anniversary. She was so proud of it. She wore it every shift. Sarah couldn't look away from the photo. The smile was kind. The eyes were bright. It was the face of a ghost made solid, made real.
"What happened to her?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. "Fall of '87, Gail said, still staring at the picture.
We had a bad influenza outbreak on the floor. Patients were crashing with respiratory failure. It was a mess. Amy, she got sick very, very fast. A fever spiked out of nowhere. Then the coughing. Then she couldn't breathe. Gail finally looked at Sarah. Her eyes were old and tired, full of a sorrow that had settled into the cracks. She died right here in this hospital, in the old ICU, which was just down the hall from where your Mr. Henderson is now. The official cause was an acute, severe respiratory infection, a mystery strain. They never quite figured it out. She turned back to the photo. Her finger traced the edge of the glass, just beside Amy's smiling face. She had a reputation, Amy did. A soft touch. When a patient was dying, especially the ones who were alone, she would stay. She'd turn off the overhead light. She'd pull a chair up to the bed, and she'd hold their hand for hours until they passed. She said nobody should have to cross over alone in the dark. The storage room was utterly silent. The hum of the distant hospital was gone. There was only the dust and the photo and the truth. It wasn't a ghost story anymore. It was a biography. A nurse died of a sudden, devastating respiratory illness in the very same wing 34 years ago. A nurse known for holding the hands of the dying. And now, in the height of another respiratory plague, in a ward full of the drowning, she was back, holding the hand of the last man left. Sarah understood now. The details weren't hallucinations. They were memories. But they weren't Mr. Henderson's memories. They were hers. And this is where the story stops being strange and starts being something else. Something worse. Because a ghost is one thing. It's a story you tell yourself in the dark to explain a chill. But a pattern, a purpose, that's different. Gail set the photo back against the wall carefully, as if it were fragile. She looked at Sarah. In that look was a lifetime of hospital secrets and a single clear warning. "Leave it alone, Sarah," she whispered. "Some doors, once you know what's on the other side, you can't close them again." But it was too late for that. The door was already open, and from where Sarah was standing, she could feel the cold draft coming through. Sarah volunteered for the final night shift. She told herself it was professional dedication, to see a patient through to transfer. But that was a lie she wrote on the timesheet. The truth was in the cold knot in her stomach. She needed to know. She needed to see it for herself. The ward was a tomb. They had moved the last of the spare equipment out that afternoon. Now, the only light was the blue glow of her computer screen at the nurse's station. A soft nightlight spilled from Mr. Henderson's open door. His ventilator was gone. He was on simple oxygen now, sleeping a natural, if fragile, sleep. Tomorrow, he would be gone, and the 4th floor east would be just another empty hallway. But tonight he was waiting! She had the hallway security feed open on her screen. It showed the same grainy black and white view. The empty chair, the dark doorways, the timestamp in the corner glowed 22:58. Her own breathing sounded too loud. The hum of the floor was different now. Just the baseline electrical murmur of a building at night. No machines. No life. It was a listening silence. 22:59. She looked up from the screen, down the long hallway toward room 418. It was empty. Of course it was empty. She could see the strip of light from his room painting a yellow rectangle on the floor. 2300. On the screen, nothing moved. In the hallway, nothing moved. 2301. This is the moment, I think, where hope fights with dread. She hoped desperately that nothing would happen, that it had been a glitch, a story, a collective dream, that the figure was gone. The timestamp on the screen rolled over. 2302, and the figure walked into the frame. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. She had not realized she was holding her breath. There she was. Pale scrubs, dark, curly hair pulled back. She walked with that same purposeful, unhurried stride. From the left. Toward room 418. Sarah's eyes darted from the screen to the actual hallway. She could see the same stretch of floor, the same doors. It was empty, utterly, completely still. But on the screen, the figure was right there. Solid. Real. 10 feet from Mr. Henderson's door. Sarah stood up. The chair wheeled back and hit the wall with a soft thud. She did not take her eyes off the monitor. The figure reached the door to 418. She did not pause. She did not look around. She simply reached out, turned the handle, and stepped inside. The door on the screen closed. Sarah's head snapped up. She stared down the real hallway. At the real door to 418, it was still open. The same rectangle of light. No one had gone in, but on the screen the room was occupied. A logical mind would have frozen. A sensible person would have called security. But Sarah was past logic. She was in the story now. And the story demanded she look. She walked. Her shoes were silent on the floor. The air grew colder with each step. That was not her imagination. The thermostat was set at 72, but the chill that wrapped around her as she neared the room was sharp and damp, like the air in a basement, like the air in the archives. She stopped just outside the door. She could hear the soft hiss of Mr. Henderson's oxygen, the gentle rustle of his sheets. Normal sounds. She leaned slowly and looked into the room. Mr. Henderson was asleep on his back. His chest rose and fell steadily. His left hand rested on top of the blanket. And it was still. The chair by his bed was empty. Sarah let out a shuddering breath. Of course it was empty. It was a trick of the light, a digital ghost. She was about to turn, to go back to the station and laugh at her own fear when her eyes adjusted to the light. There were 2 impressions on the blanket near his hip, 2 shallow depressions in the fabric, as if someone had been sitting on the edge of the bed and had just stood up. And then she saw his hand. It was not twitching. It was positioned. His fingers were curled loosely, not in a fist, but as if they were resting around something, as if they were being held.
From the bed, Mr. Henderson let out a soft sigh.
A peaceful, settling sound. In a clear, quiet voice, thick with sleep, he whispered a single word into the dark room. Amy. Sarah backed away from the door. She did not run. She walked backwards, one slow step at a time, until she felt the cold wall of the nurse's station against her spine. On the computer screen, the hallway feed was unchanged. The empty hallway. The closed door of 418. The timestamp read 04:14. She had not been standing there for 5 hours. It had been 2 minutes. She looked at the clock on the wall. It read 11:04 p.m. The screen was wrong. The feed was showing her something that had not happened yet, or something that was happening somewhere else. In a different layer of the same quiet night, she watched, numb, as the timestamp on the screen hit 04:15. The door to 418 opened. The figure stepped out. She turned, and for the first time she seemed to pause. She turned her head, just slightly, looking back into the room she had just left. Then she turned toward the camera. Her face was still a smudge of gray, a suggestion of features. But she was not looking down at a chart. She was looking directly up the hallway. Directly at the camera. Directly, it seemed, at Sarah. She stood there for 3 full seconds. Then she turned and walked out of the frame to the left and was gone. The feed returned to an empty hallway. The timestamp rolled forward normally again, syncing with the wall clock. 11:05 p.m. In room 418, Mr. Henderson slept on. A small, calm smile was on his face. His left hand lay open, relaxed, on the blanket. Sarah sat there until dawn. She did not move. She just watched the empty hallway, on the screen and in reality, waiting for a sign that the night was over. The sign that came was the morning sun, pale and weak, bleeding through the windows at the end of the hall. It was over. But she knew, as certainly as she knew her own name, that it was not really over at all. Some doors do not close. They just wait for the next person who needs to open them. The official report was 3 pages long. It used words like inconclusive and unexplained visual artifact. It suggested a possible fault in the archival software, causing a cached loop of old footage to overlay the live feed. It was a masterpiece of plausible denial. David from security signed it. His signature was a shaky line. Room 418 was stripped and disinfected from floor to ceiling with industrial bleach. It reopened for a hip replacement patient 2 weeks later. Nothing happened. The room was just a room again. Mr. Henderson recovered. His lungs cleared. He was transferred to rehab and then discharged to his daughter's home. Sarah followed up once with a phone call. His voice was stronger. He talked about the garden and about the grandkids. And then, quietly, he said, "I think about her often, you know, Amy. I hope she's at peace." He said it. Not like someone remembering a hallucination. He said it like someone remembering a dear friend who had moved away. A peaceful, unshakable certainty. The comfort he'd received was real to him. And in a way, that made it real. Sarah couldn't shake it. The cold of that hallway had gotten into her bones. The sight of those 2 impressions on the blanket. The 5-hour discrepancy on a timestamp. She put in for a permanent transfer. The request was approved without question. People burn out on COVID units. It was a story they understood. She moved to the maternity ward. It was all light and noise and new beginnings. She told herself it was better. But sometimes, in the quiet lull of a night shift, she'd catch herself staring at a sleeping patient's hand. She'd watch for a twitch. She'd feel a chill when the air conditioning kicked on. A damn basement chill that didn't belong. She'd developed a habit of never sitting with her back to an open door. This is the aftermath they don't tell you about. It's not about seeing something, it's about the way the world feels afterward. Thinner, like a painted backdrop, and you've seen the ragged edge where the canvas doesn't quite meet the wall. Months passed. Fall turned to winter. Sarah was coming off her shift, heading for the parking garage when the hospital PA crackled. A calm, automated voice said, "Code blue, 4th floor east. Room 407. Code blue." She froze in the stairwell. 4th east was a general med-surg floor again. No more COVID. Just ordinary sick people. She shouldn't have gone. But her feet carried her up one flight. She pushed the door open onto the familiar hallway. It was different in the day. Brighter. Busier. The code team was a whirl of blue and green scrubs outside 407. There was a crash cart and sharp voices. She lingered near the nurse's station, a ghost from the floor's other life. A young nurse, looking stressed, was talking to the charge nurse. "Just bizarre," the young nurse was saying. "He was so agitated all night, confused, trying to get out of bed. We were about to restrain him. Then, maybe 20 minutes ago, he just calmed down. Completely. He said he was fine. He said the nice nurse was sitting with him now." The charge nurse, focused on the code, nodded absently. "Which nurse?" The young nurse shrugged, already turning back to her computer. "Dunno. He said she had red hair. Said she was holding his hand." Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. The hum of the floor seemed to sharpen into a single, high-pitched tone in her ears. She looked down the hallway toward room 418. Its door was open. A housekeeper was inside, mopping the floor. An ordinary room. The code in 407 was called. Time of death, 11:17 a.m. The teen filed out, their energy gone, faces grim. The hallway returned to its routine murmur. Sarah finally turned and left. She walked to her car in the cold winter light. She didn't look back. Because she understood now. It wasn't about one patient or one room. It was about the pattern, the purpose. A nurse who held the hands of the dying. A figure who came when the drowning was worst, when the noise of the world faded to a single, terrible hum. The door to that story hadn't closed when Mr. Henderson left. It hadn't closed when she transferred. It was still open. It would always be open. And somewhere in the hospital, in the quiet dark of a bad night, there would always be a patient alone and terrified. They'd feel a cool hand take theirs, and a soft voice in the silence telling them they wouldn't have to cross over alone. That's the comfort, and that's the haunting. They are the same thing. The tape has reached its end. I hope the stories tonight brought a pleasant chill to your spine as you drifted further into the dark. Thank you for braving the shadows here at the Sleep Paralysis tapes. If you are still awake, lying still in the quiet, remember to contact me with your own unsettling encounters so they can be added to our growing archive. As my voice fades away, let the silence of your room wrap around you completely. May your sleep be undisturbed, your doors remain locked, and your morning arrive safely. Until we open the tapes again, good night.